Hi, and welcome to Ivy English. I'm Karen.
And I'm Chris Gorski.
Today is February 5th, and we're on page 13 in your magazines. And today we have two short news articles for you.
This is the first time I've done the split article, so I'm a little excited for this. This is an idea I've had kicking around in my head for a while. Like, what if we have like little lists? But those are kind of everywhere on the internet, aren't they?
That's true, listicles.
So why not? Let's enjoy our proper news articles here for once.
All right, the first article is entitled, Climate Change Causes National Borders to Be Redrawn. So let's talk about that so we're kind of prepared for what comes after it, because these short articles are often very dense and concentrated. So this is really interesting because we think of national borders as being very fixed. So this is where the U.S. ends and this is where Canada starts. And there's a couple of interesting stories about why that happened. And sometimes it's just an accident of history. But we think normally that a country is going to be pretty insistent that this is my border and that's your country and we're not going to change it. But there are places where that is not the case. The border is not very clear. And one of them is a border between China, I believe, and a part of India, Kashmir, I think.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
And this border has been a source of contention for a very long time. But China and India recently agreed to just let it go and stop arguing about it. And that was amazing.
I remember an old video, speaking of this. They weren't allowed to shoot at each other, so they would have like sticks and rocks.
Oh, no.
And they would literally just hit each other with sticks. Like groups of soldiers would pass by each other, throw rocks at each other, hit each other with sticks. It was preposterous because they're dressed up in full military regalia.
And it's never going to be solved. And once you realize that it will never be solved, you just say, let's stop arguing about it and let it go.
We don't think of rivers as borders as being something that changes very frequently. However, rivers are actually change rather rapidly, and they create these border disputes between nations that are a little unfriendly. Fortunately here, I think we have a situation where two nations generally get along very well, but climate change is kind of forcing an issue to happen here.
So I find this fascinating. Let's get into the article. Climate change causes national borders to be redrawn. That means you have to draw them again, you decide on them again, and then you have a new standard come out. In an agreement in 2023 between Switzerland and Italy, part of their shared border is set to be redrawn due to the acceleration of glacial melting. Though Switzerland has already officially signed the agreement, Italy has yet to do so. Large sections of the border between the two countries have been defined by glacier ridgelines and areas of perpetual snow, but increasing climate change has caused the natural boundaries to shift.
According to the Swiss Glacier Monitoring Network, Switzerland's glaciers lost 4% of their volume in 2023. The revised boundaries will affect regions beneath the Matterhorn and near several popular ski resorts. These changes aim to clarify which country is responsible for the management and maintenance of specific natural areas.
Now, this is a great thing that they can agree to redraw the boundary, but we notice that Italy hasn't signed yet. I wonder what's going on.
I wanted to know more about that too. I actually tried to look it up, but I just assume it's like a parliament thing. It's money. So how do we pay for this? Do we want to pay this?
Yeah, money. There you go, money. So let's go back to the title. Climate change causes national borders to be redrawn. Now, notice that climate is a noun, change is a noun, so that means it's a compound noun, and that means that change is not stressed. We don't say climate change, we say climate change. But national is just an adjective, borders is a noun. We stress both of them, national borders. And finally, the word redrawn. Now, you know that drawn is the past participle of to draw, and that just means to make a picture, or to decide, in this case, on a borderline. And if we add re to many different verbs like redo or reheat, it just means to do it a second time or to do it again. So they're going to draw it again. We're changing from the original borders to something else, to be redrawn. All right, the first sentence, in an agreement in 2023 between Switzerland and Italy, part of their shared border is set to be redrawn due to the acceleration of glacial melting.
Okay, when something is set to be or set to happen, this means it will happen at a future date It's not yet decided, so it's kind of left open, but we know that this is a future action that will take place.
Using the word to with a verb generally just refers to the future. For example, here are some things to do. It generally is talking about the future. The next sentence, though Switzerland has already officially signed the agreement, Italy has yet to do so. Again, we're talking about the future. It hasn't happened yet. They have yet means still, to do so.
Boy, they're just living up to the stereotype, aren't they?
Yeah. Well, they have an infamous bureaucracy that's kind of slow, I will say.
Yes.
And I have to tell this story. Excuse me if you're somebody who's crazy about Italy or if you're Italian. But I had some Taiwanese friends many years ago. They were sent to Italy to work for the government. They were representatives of Taiwan for the government. And then when this person came back, he said, it's so good to be back in Taiwan. This was like in the 80s, early 90s. He said, it's so good to be back into Taiwan where everything is so orderly and efficient and clean.
Yes, efficiency is the word that I would think about with Taiwan. And as the opposite, and again, I'm just making a generalization because there's value in having your own experience and your own way of life. Just as a person that just wants to get things done, I might go crazy in Italy.
That's right. And this was back in the early 90s before we had the MRT and everything else. So keep that in mind. Let's go on to the next sentence. Large sections of the border between the two countries have been defined by glacier ridgelines and areas of perpetual snow. But increasing climate change has caused the natural boundaries to shift. All right, so Chris said a little earlier that the path a river takes can change a lot, and it doesn't necessarily take a lot of time. It can happen after a major natural event or catastrophe like flooding or a hurricane or something like that. But here we see that it's happening also with two things. Glacier ridge lines. Now that is the top edge that sticks out at the top of a glacier. That's melting. So that means the shape of the glacier is changing. Or the ridgeline defined the border between the two countries, but because it's melting, that borderline is going to change according to how it melts. And perpetual snow, that's snow that never melts because it's so cold there that snow doesn't have a chance to melt. But now it is starting to melt.
So, in fact, perpetual is Latin for the word continuous, and so that makes sense. Ridgelines you can think of as like the spine on your back. So if you were to get down on your hands and knees, and there's that line along your back, and those little tiny bumps, if you're thin enough, that would be the ridge of your back. And so on this side, it would be Italy, but on the other side of the spine, on the other side of this mountain, that would be Switzerland. And because they're melting, those shift. These are made of ice. And so as they melt, those lines will adjust. And now, what used to be Switzerland may now be Italy, or vice versa. The opposite may be true.
Which you think in theory you could say, well, let's just let it go. It's just the geography that's changing a bit. But it does make a difference because who is responsible for taking care of this area? For how much of it is the question now.
All right, let's go on to our next paragraph here. According to the Swiss Glacier Monitoring Network, Switzerland's glaciers lost 4% of their volume in 2023. So the Swiss Glacier Monitoring Network sounds like the world's worst TV station, but it is something important to consider here because they're paying attention to how these things affect their climates, how they affect their water flows, how much water they will have in reserve for farming in the future. Glaciers really matter, and if they start disappearing, it impacts a lot of things, not just like, hey, they're big ice mountains that are now gone. There's a lot of tourist dollars that are drawn away when people can't go skiing or there's no ecotourism.
Now, not to mention the ocean levels rising and problems like that, which are very big problems. But that was 4% of their entire volume in one single year.
1 year. That's my takeaway from this sentence, too. The revised boundaries will affect regions beneath the Matterhorn and near several popular ski resorts. And again, just as I said, if people are trying to go to ski resorts, these are little places visited for holidays for specifically ski as a recreation. There's no snow, so they're not going to go there. That's a lot of people's livelihoods.
Exactly. And it's a big deal, especially for Europeans that are sort of in the area. I was in France one summer, and so many people take their vacations skiing in the mountains. Now, that's going to affect this whole source of income.
I had a longtime student of mine study abroad in France just this past summer, and he really wanted to go to Switzerland to see the mountains and see the snow. And he was pretty disappointed by the overall lack of snow. Not that there wasn't snow, but just that there was an overall lack of his ability to, maybe he was expecting something bigger from like the pictures and movies he had seen, but the overall levels of snow and the season, of course, affected that. And he kind of went away disappointed from that.
So it wasn't awe-inspiring as he expected, and I think that is a question of expectations. How we react to something depends on what we're expecting.
Yeah, he definitely did hold this in high regard. He was looking forward to it, so I agree with you here. Let's continue. These changes aim to clarify which country is responsible for the management and maintenance of specific natural areas.
And that involves a lot of work and a lot of money, so they really have to sort this out. Okay, time for our second article. Bear sightings increase in Japan despite fewer attacks.
So that seems a little bit maybe incongruous. These are two ideas that don't really fit together. Generally speaking, the more bears you see, the more you will be attacked, I think. So there's a reason for this, and we're going to find out what they are. Now let's look at a few words here. Your sightings is the noun form. We have see. It just means to see. And when we use the word despite, we mean without being affected by. So we see more bears, but we are not affected by more bears biting us.
What is the difference between sight and sighting? Both of them are nouns that are actually based on the verb to see. Sight is just the ability to see, like he has very good eyesight. Or that is a sight to see, that's something to see. But sighting means a person has used their eyes to perceive something on one occasion. So two sightings means maybe one or two different people saw something on two different occasions.
A very common mistake in English here, you will hear a lot of people more colloquially say, despite less attacks. Attack is countable, so you should use fewer. I hear this all the time on YouTube where people are just casually speaking and they use less and fewer. Please pay attention to that. If you are learning English casually by consuming media or YouTube, they will use this incorrectly.
And a lot of people love to argue about it. Okay, let's go to our content. Despite a decrease in bear attacks nationwide, Japanese officials are urging residents to stay alert as bear sightings have reached a record high. By the end of August 2024, 58 bear attacks had been reported across the country, a decline from the 71 incidents during the same period last year. Most of these attacks occurred in the Tohoku region.
Meanwhile, by the end of July, 10,704 bear sightings had been recorded, marking the highest number since data collection began in 2009. Experts attributed the surge in sightings to increased public awareness and the rising number of wandering cubs as many adult bears were captured in 2023. While sufficient food supplies in the Tohoku region may have helped reduce bear attacks, officials warn of potential risks in other areas with poor harvests where bears may venture into residential neighborhoods in search of food.
And when you read that last sentence, do you have a lot of pictures of YouTube videos you've watched online from Canada and the U.S.?
Oh, bears are scary. If you see a bear...
They're very smart. They're very good at getting into a locked car and very good at getting into human houses.
Bears are the kind of animal... All right, so Lewis and Clark were these two explorers that wanted to venture out into the American wilderness after the Louisiana Purchase. If you know history, you will know these two people. Here's the reason I'm telling you this. They got a bunch of Indian guides to go into the wilderness with them, and there were only one thing these Indian guides were afraid of, and those were bears. They're like, if there are bears, you're on your own, especially the grizzly bear, which is the biggest, meanest bear around.
Very aggressive.
That's right. Bears are faster than you. They are stronger than you. Their tempers are worse than you. They can climb trees faster than you. If a bear wants you dead, you're in trouble.
Yeah, and they're not particularly fond of humans. Don't think you're going to launch a charm offensive on your bear and win him over. It's not going to work. Unless it's a cub. Cubs don't know better yet, but bears are basically pretty violent while being smart. Okay, our title again, bear sightings increase in Japan despite fewer attacks. So that means fewer people are getting attacked by bears, but they still see a lot of bears. Our first sentence, despite a decrease in bear attacks nationwide, Japanese officials are urging residents to stay alert as bear sightings have reached a record high. So if you're not paying attention, you think, well, they just said there was a decrease, but now it's a record high. They're talking about two different things here. The first thing is attacks. There are fewer bear attacks, but much larger number of bear sightings. We see a lot of bears, but there have been fewer attacks.
I want to say that there is an upside to this, right? Because how often are we talking about the disappearance of animals, extinction, or large numbers of them dying out? Here we have these large predators that can kill us, and we're still able to have some of them around in nature. And I think there's a hidden upside even while we have a very large potential danger.
That's right. We still want to keep these creatures around us. By the end of August 2024, 58 bear attacks had been reported across the country, a decline from the 71 incidents during the same period last year. So in 2023, there were reports of 71 bear attacks. However, there were only 58 in 2024, which is encouraging. So fewer bears were attacking humans. Most of these attacks occurred in the Tohoku region. And if you're not that familiar with Japanese geography, it's on Honshu, and it was the northern part of Honshu, the main island of Japan.
Yeah, it's south of Hokkaido. I know a lot of Taiwanese know where that is.
That's the most northern island.
So the instance you would most likely come across a bear attack, especially if you're in a residential area, is around food, garbage, and dumpsters. They're looking for food. Maybe you're throwing out your bag of garbage in your dumpster, and you go outside and you go to put it in there, and hello, there's a bear there, and you spook the bear. Yeah. And if you scare the bear just because you are being not especially loud, that bear might turn around and hit you or bite you or just do any number of things. And a lot of times, bears aren't looking for trouble. They just are protecting themselves the way they know how. And it's unfortunate. In countries like South Africa, you're advised to open the garbage lids away from you. So imagine opening a garbage can and you open it away so that a monkey, if it's inside eating the garbage, will jump out away from you instead of onto your face.
Oh,
similarly, if you know if there are bears in your area, when you're approaching a dumpster, you kind of stomp your feet around, cough a little bit, make some noise so that the bear could hear you coming and then you won't startle it.
I went to Yosemite National Park some years ago, and there are constant broadcasts of warnings of bears. And they tell you, do not store food in your car or your cabin. You can't. And so, everybody thinks, well, I'm okay. I didn't store any food. But somebody's car got broken into because they just insert their claws along the rubber edging of the door where the door meets the rest of the car, and they can pry it open. And the mothers teach their baby bears how to do it. So the baby bears learn how to do that very early in Yosemite because there's so many cars, so many people. And a car still got broken into because it had an empty M&M's wrapper inside. Empty.
Bears can smell into cans. So you could put a can of food, like a closed can, up to a bear, and it will know what's inside. And it will choose its favorite foods. These are animals that are just different than us. Please be careful.
Yes, very powerful animals. On to the second paragraph.
Meanwhile, by the end of July, 10,704 bear sightings have been recorded, marking the highest number since data collection began in 2009.
So we are seeing a lot of bears around.
I wonder are they calling? If you see the bear, do you call and say there's a bear? Or are these police? I wonder how they're reported.
If these are like national park areas, you probably would report it to the administration of the park.
Well, that's something to learn more about.
Yeah.
Next sentence, experts attributed the surge in sightings to increased public awareness and the rising number of wandering cubs as many adult bears were captured in 2023.
Okay, so that's part of the answer to the question that you were wondering about. So first of all, people are reporting these incidents more often. And second, I guess they're having lots of cubs that are surviving and they're wandering around looking for food.
This is actually how I ended up with so many cats in my house. If you guys know me, I have 9 cats. And I was adopting cats out. We were fostering them. But we had a particularly warm winter in Taiwan.
Oh.
And what people don't know about cats is that they have babies all year round, but they usually don't survive the coldest months. Because the summer was so warm, we had a lot of leftover kittens, and we just could not adopt out that many. And so they became permanent parts of my family.
Oh, my.
This is the same thing that happened to these cubs.
Okay, next sentence.
While sufficient food supplies in the Tohoku region may have helped reduce bear attacks, officials warn of potential risks in other areas with poor harvests, where bears may venture into residential neighborhoods in search of food.
So what's happening here is the bears are around, but because there's a lot of food available, they don't have to venture so much out of the forest and have more contacts with humans. And if they do, they've already had their fill. Their tummy is full. They're not going to bother the humans so much.
We have some good words in this sentence.
Yeah.
Sufficient means good enough. It doesn't mean like there's so much food that they couldn't possibly eat anymore, but sufficient means we have enough food. We have potential risks, which means we have this capacity or possible amount of risk. It may not be super high, but it's definitely there. And the harvest is how much food you collect from a farming season.
So if you have a poor harvest, that means you're trying to grow a lot of food, but it didn't rain enough, so a lot of the crops dried up, and you didn't have much of a harvest. So if that happened to your harvest, there's less food for people and also less food for bears.
And lastly, we have the word venture, which just means to go into a place, especially with kind of an adventurous type of nature. So we're a little bit excited to go into this maybe more wild and dangerous place.
Or risky, yeah.
Or for a bear, that would be a residential neighborhood with lots of people. Now, in many communities, if they do see a bear, they won't shoot it on sight to kill. What they will often try to do is capture the bear and take it far away. They'll take it out to a much more remote location. And unfortunately, at least in the U.S., if the bear comes back another time, then they're going to put that bear down, meaning they're going to kill this bear because this bear, for some reason, wants to be attached to this residential neighborhood, and that becomes a public safety risk. However, they always do try to give this bear an effort to move it away and stay away from people, which is probably best for both the people and the bear.
That's right. Or they may have decided, like you said, that this was an especially productive dumpster and they want to go back. So that's one reason they come back. So we don't see bears so often in Taiwan. The bear has been sighted in some areas in the east and the south. But while I was hiking one day, I saw some kind of a creature ahead. I didn't know if it was like a ferret because it didn't look like a cat or dog. And as I got closer, I found out that it was a macaque.
Well, I saw one in the Shilin area not a few weeks ago. No kidding.
Taiwan or Formosan macaques are flourishing in the Taipei area. Be careful. And I caught eyes with it, and then it started coming toward me. So don't look at them. Just look away. And usually they ignore you. But if you kind of fix a gaze on them, they'll be curious and come over.
Oh, that's interesting.
So I lifted up my umbrella. I said, no, and I walked on, and things were fine.
I ignored it, too, just because I was like, let nature be nature. But it's bizarre. We both... How did we both come across those? That's crazy.
Because they are flourishing. There are so many of them. Be careful. Do not interact with them, and most definitely do not feed them. That's it for today. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.